Okay, hello. This is update number 2. I suppose you could start to call them kind of dev diaries as I keep this up. Maybe I will. Um, Bird Patrol is here helping. They never help. They do type, but they never help. Um, right. There's updates to the site, and this is a tour through them. Let's click in. So this is the home page. It looks exactly the same as before. If I scroll down, though, you'll see that now there's a 4th source been added. So I let things settle a bit after I'd done the first release, and I thought, okay, let's start adding new sources. So I've popped on National Grid electricity distribution and their digitalization strategy. So we'll see that coming up everywhere as we go. Let's click into, let's click into the interactive view. There's a little bug that I'm just fixing in the background now, where the interactive view is coming out a bit small. That'll be fixed by the time you see it. But anyway, I'm zooming in. So here we have the interactive view. There is a bit of difference here compared to before. You now have this panel on the left called source scope. And at the moment it's set to all sources, but you can step through each source and choose which one you want displayed. So if I click onto SIF, you'll see lots of the numbers downgrade because now you're only looking at SIF's contribution to the target architecture. And SIF, you can see, is a lot more of an applications layer focus. It tends to be looking at specific use cases rather than building up foundational capabilities for the sector, which tend not to get much attention. In fact, they very much don't get any attention through SIF. You can see the zeros everywhere. Next up, you've got DESNZ. So DESNZ is actually DESNZ's digitalization framework, to be specific. I should probably improve that labeling at some point. So the digitalization framework, as you might expect, its scores look stronger over on the oversight steps. And there are some things in the middle layers where coordination is needed, and there's a bit of foundational work, but it's not all the types of foundational work. It's probably the scope that a digitalization framework should cover in broad terms. But its stated intents are around those corners. Next one, data best practice. It's really quite a targeted piece of work. It sits down here largely at the data preparation layer. There's a little bit of work it does to tee up more serious middleware activities, but it's not leading their development. It's making sure the foundational treatment of data is robust. And even then, it assumes data exists and so on. So for example, data digitization, which is here, gets a 0 because often database practice just doesn't deal with it today. If I go back in a few years, I think I said that originally in my first consultation that there was only so much we could introduce at one point in time, and it was on the back burner because it raises its own world of complications. It's an interesting thing to maybe revert to. Actually, there's still no obligations in the sector about data digitization. And maybe that will continue to show up as we build up these pictures. Now, the last one there, National Grid, this is the new one. So it's one of the country's electricity distribution networks. It's making contributions to the sector's coordination, but it's not leading it. That feels correct for the type of organization it is. You can see it's doing quite a lot of foundational work, as you might expect, as a data monopoly in the sector. It's got a lot of data preparation to do for other people to be able to work with the key information in the sector. It's building and running and taking lead in some of the middle layer sections. And I think we might look at some of those as a little example shortly. And then it's doing some applications. I think, yeah, and I'm a bit surprised here. So I think this is a point of interest for mulling the brain over. It's getting 2s largely from its strategy, so relevant work to the sector's applications. And of course, I've only given, these are only a handful of examples, applications. It's not like I've covered everything here. So maybe the stuff they're doing fits in a place where my applications layer runs up short, because the applications layer was really just example, whereas the rest of the architecture was where my attention really was when creating it. But you might have expected some leading work somewhere, perhaps, and that's just interesting. Should you have or not? And bear in mind that they might be doing a lot of work internally for themselves that's highly strategic and very relevant to these use cases. But the way the target architecture for the sector is scored is interested in whether the work you're doing progresses the sector's capability, not just your own capability. So you might be doing relevant work, but you're probably not leading or comprehensively solving problems if you've got if you're trying to do your internal needs. So it may very well be that they've got things to say on these topics, but that they don't quite meet the criteria. So let me pop up and remind everyone. Right, so I pick one at random, autonomous AI. It might be that the actual criteria that sit here about the definition of autonomous AI is not quite their focus. So that could be another explanation, right? So there's multiple ways, and I won't pretend to be intimately familiar with all the details, so there's just no time. This is a new way of exploring, and it also means, and it doesn't really do it yet, because I've deliberately picked different things to get started with, so you wouldn't expect too much overlap between them all, but you know, that might change as we start to add more sources. And actually, I mean, just on that note, for those of you who are less kind of familiar or need a kind of visual, I like a visual picture, as you can see. I'm going to pop over to the Digitalization Task Force report from some years ago now. I did a piece of work for this. Here it is, Annex 3. If we pop into there, I drew a diagram that I find quite helpful on this topic. And I thought I would bring it up, so I've come prepared. So if I zoom in, this is a bit of an ugly but functional picture that gives you a kind of a helicopter view of who are the organizations that sit in either the government entities or the core licensed operators that sit around those for the energy sector. And you can see it's mainly upstream. So for example, electricity suppliers, yes, they're licensed, but they just get a mention down here, and same true for some of the others as well, because they're not quite as upstream enough to be what was the focus at the time when I was drawing this diagram. So National Grid, that I just added as an electricity distribution company. So here we were 8. I mean, things are changing, and this is including Ireland and such, as well as GB. But you can see at the time there's this pixelated logo here that says Western Power Distribution, which of course were purchased by National Grid a few years ago, so this is out of date. But this is the ones that have been analysed and added to the sources. Is this middle of the country distribution network? But of course that's just one, right? And look at all the others around it, and okay, maybe we probably won't expand the scope to Ireland, and maybe not even Northern Ireland. But even if you do that, that's quite a lot of organisations to go through. It's going to take a little bit of time to sort of build up the picture and see the overlaps in full. Then you've got offshore on the left-hand side. You've got a lot of the kind of administrative capabilities in the middle of the sector, so like code bodies and such. At the time, NESO was ESO, and so this is again out of date, but they're all in there. And then BEIS, which is now DESNES, and which we've done some analysis on, which I'm still the same. And there we go, right? So there's a big old world to be built up, and I've just done 4 parts of it so far. So there's a ways to go, but the engine's getting going. I'm going to come back out from the main picture back to the home page. Let's just sort of zoom out again from that bug. Right. Let's have a look at National Grid on its own page. So there's a bit of a difference here. If you saw the old version, now introduced these pictures again, the same picture as before, but just put it as a headline to each of the source-specific pages, and now it's automatically filtered in just for National Grid. So let's look at one of these properly. So I said earlier, there's some of the green stuff they've got in the middle. There's a few of them we'd have a look at. Let's pick one: lexicon and taxonomy. So in the lexicon and taxonomy, we've now got an explanation that it says that they're doing things like common data dictionary, SIM efforts look good, and there are some gaps about maintaining an authoritative lexicon with version controls and so on. So the high bar isn't quite there, but it's doing quite a lot of work. We can expand more about this capability and see that actually they're doing a pretty strong job on meeting the purpose and what it is and the scope. It's a bit weaker on specificity over the outputs that you might expect. And perhaps you wouldn't get that so much from a strategy document as has been analysed, but you would want to have the comfort that these sorts of things are committed somewhere, and it's not obvious to me that you would get that elsewhere either. You can then have a look at the source documents content. So what parts of their digitalization strategy built up the evidence base that they're doing. They've got a lot of good intentions around lexicon and taxonomy. And you can see that there's a single score that came out of 3, and the other parts of the document might reference it, but they're not really leading the way. So let's have a look at that. So delivering for stakeholders under the primary test, this is a strong fit, and get commits to things like glossary for vocabulary, standardizing terms, describing data across DNOs. And then, so that's, it says that they're doing a lot of good stuff. Let's look in a bit more detail. Let's delivering for stakeholders. Here's the section from the document where they talk about this. And you can look at each of the components of the lexicon and taxonomy requirements, so defining and maintaining a controlled vocabulary. Well, we heard that up on the headline summary, so it'll just be restating here that they're making those commitments to vocabularies and such. You can look down at the typical outputs and say, hierarchical taxonomy structures. Does not describe the structures, so this is a bit weak, right? So a strategy document doesn't go so far as to say we're definitely doing this, so it's ambiguous, and so it's a 2. You could imply that they're probably doing something for it, but you don't have that confidence and certainty that they're definitely doing it. Now, if I just back out of this for a moment, so we're now on this delivering for stakeholders section within NGED overall. In fact, if I go back out entirely, so delivering for stakeholders will be in here somewhere. Can I find it? Can I find it by I? No. All right, let's search stakeholders. There they are. Right, so our approach, delivering for stakeholders, takes us back to this exact same page we were just in. And you might remember we've been through this before, but you can have a look at all parts of the target architecture, maybe filter out the stuff that isn't really happening. And you can see in here, there's 3 for lexicon and taxonomy. It's helping on other topics as well, but this is, and then we're back on the page we were looking at a moment ago. But if I open up, this is what was analyzed to come to the conclusion of what they're doing. And what is this? Well, I can go to the bit above, original source, click on it, takes me to page 20, delivering to stakeholders in their digitalization strategy. And as you step through this section, what you find is you get to standardized and usable, and it starts going into data topics and such throughout these 2 pages. And this is this information, and that information is what got analyzed. And that information is what gets you to these summary statements. And then those summary statements get you to this aggregate summary statement that works across the different components that make up lexicon. So this is how the process is working. So, that's a nice, this is one of the scores that went up between, and when I say up, actually, let me back all the way out to the home page. When I say up, I mean for the entirety of all sources. Lexicon taxonomy was a 2, I think, before this update, and NGED's efforts have made that a 3. Now, that's a thing that I should draw out because it's interesting, right? These are early days of development, and there's a score here on digitalization strategy that is a 3, and we've got all sources marked. A little bit. Now, attentive among you, or anyone who's been following, will know that when I did my first update, that was actually scored 4. And you might ask yourself, how by adding grid distribution into the sources has a score gone down? This is the only score that's gone down, but it has gone down. And the answer is a little bit involved, and it's a part of me just settling down the scoring methodology in these early days. So it is useful to know that the scoring method is stochastic in nature, which means you can get slightly different answers each time to the same question. And you get a bit of a distribution around those answers of positivity and negativity each time you run the analysis, and you get a middle ground. And I think I would say I hadn't sufficiently picked out the middle ground on my first iteration through. And what's really unfortunate is that this specific capability was also at the margins. It was a high 3, very low 4 before. And because we had a bit of distribution around the noise, around the scoring uncertainty, because it's stochastic, we seem to have, I think last time, got a slightly unusually positive answer compared to the typical answer. So when I reran the analysis, the score came out lower, and I've interrogated it many times over because I was really interested in this, and the score really is a 3, but it's a very high 3. We could zoom in on it. So leads, as we said, you can get some of the explanation. A lot of it hangs off DESNES work, and actually that's part of the proof. If I open up the source items and go down, you'll see that all of the sources contributing to this score are DESNES, with some minor exceptions on NGED there. But those exceptions are scores of 2. They're not really adding a lot to it. The high scores all come from DESNES sections. But let me just open up the more about this capability section, because in here you do get scores by component of the capability. So score by purpose, why it's important, what it is. And I also score scope and outputs. Actually, I don't do important. I shouldn't have said that. We don't score why it's important. So you can see we've got a 3 here, and it's a good 3. You get a 3 on what it is. You get a 3 on the scope for the outputs of what's been holding this back. So the typical outputs are only coming out with a score of 2. And why are they coming out? It's because there's There's probably are some documented goals and objective outcomes. I suspect that's scored quite well. I don't have the explanations to hand. The ecosystem-wide non-technical roadmap, but there is a roadmap. So you could say that's doing fine. I say it with a degree of hesitation because if I jump to the fourth bullet, it talks about milestones and target maturity levels. And that is stuff that you might find features in a roadmap. But really, I think the fourth bullet is probably an area where there isn't actually very much about that in the framework from DevNet. And so I think that's probably pulling down the score. Register of roles and responsibilities, they do stuff like that, actually. It's a high level, but they have been quite clear about roles and responsibilities where they've talked about it. So I think that's probably performing reasonably well on scoring. Governance and accountability structures, there is governance, and I don't know if it would score as well on accountabilities. It's kind of implied, but it's probably less clear, partly because things like the milestones are a little ill-defined at the moment. So it's hard to really place strong accountabilities. You could say conceptually what people are responsible for, but I wouldn't say the document gives you the scope to be really specific about it. And then a register of actions showing who's responsible for what. I mean, there's sort of a register of actions at the end of it. It's at least structurally quite clear, but they're probably at a higher level. And I think particularly on it's really a specificity issue that I suspect has pulled the score down to a 2 on this occasion. It feels intuitively correct to me as well, as I've read through it enough times. And of course, because the others are only 3s, you're asked, and you've got a 2 present, you'd have to be performing very well with your 3s to get it up to a 4, and it nearly does, and hence it did last time, right? It's nearly, but it didn't quite get to the 4, and that's part of this is why I'm running this process, because now rather than just go, oh, is the framework any good? Is it doing the right thing? Instead, I think be very specific about it and say, well, I think it's doing quite good in respect to a lot of these things. But as you just heard, I've now got something I can test against and say, actually, I think you've got some weaknesses around the specificity that are prohibiting you from having appropriate accountabilities, to having clear enough, probably detailed objectives within that. And there's perhaps not sufficiently detailed non-technical roadmap, and not all the technical stuff does not have to be in there. That's not the purpose of the strategy layer, but there's probably still even then just a really quite limited amount of detail of what to expect on the horizon, which is I think a much more constructive conversation to have with the sector about where are our gaps and what should we do. And you could do the equivalent thing over time. So the idea is that once you get, for example, we could go through all of the distribution networks and have them displayed, and then start looking through and seeing, well, if all of them are trying to put a standardized taxonomy in place for the sector, you would expect those taxonomies to all be the same initiative, for example, right? Or else you've got a problem. And that's the next thing that's coming, is in the pipeline, but we haven't got it in the current version. So there we go. There's an update. Grid electricity distribution is in. I'll start having a think about who is next on the hit list to get their work added, and we'll put source number 5 in. If you've got ideas or requests for sources to be analysed, then that would be very interesting to hear about. I'm not making any promises. I will analyse what I feel like on the basis of practicalities and interest, but I am very open-minded, and if other people have got interest in things, that often gets my interest. So there we go. Update number 2. Enjoy.